Los Angeles is dying. And if you've been there recently, you already know something feels desperately wrong. The city of dreams, the place where millions came to chase stardom and sunshine, is now hemorrhaging residents faster than any major metropolitan area in American history. Over 600,000 people have fled in just 3 years. 600,000 souls who once believed in the magic, who paid impossible rents and fought brutal traffic because they thought it was worth it. But here's what nobody's telling you. This isn't just about high costs or politics. What's happening to Los Angeles right now is a cautionary tale about what happens when a city loses its soul, when the very essence that made it legendary gets consumed by greed, neglect, and a refusal to face reality. And if you think this is just California's problem, wait until you see what comes next. Let me take you back to when Los Angeles meant something extraordinary. Picture 1945. The war is over. Soldiers are returning home, and America is hungry for dreams. Los Angeles stands ready to deliver them. The golden age of Hollywood is exploding across silver screens worldwide. Studios are churning out classics that will define cinema forever. Stars like Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, and Rita Hayworth walk down boulevards where everyday people can glimpse them. The city pulses with creative energy, with possibility, with that intangible quality that made people sell everything they owned just to buy a one-way bus ticket west. The weather is perfect 300 days a year. Orange groves stretch for miles. You can buy a modest house in a decent neighborhood for $8,000. Young families are moving in by the thousands, building communities, planting roots, believing their children will inherit something even better. The aerospace industry is booming. Defense contractors are hiring engineers by the hundreds. The port is expanding, bringing goods from across the Pacific. Television is being invented right here, in Burbank and Glendale studios. The music industry is finding its footing on Sunset Boulevard. Everything feels possible. Everything feels like it's just beginning. Fast forward to the 1960s and 70s. Los Angeles has become the cultural epicenter of the Western world. The Beach Boys are singing about California girls and endless summers. The Doors are recording dark, poetic masterpieces in West Hollywood. Movies are getting bolder, more ambitious. Directors like Francis Ford Coppola and Roman Polanski are creating films that will be studied for generations. The counterculture is thriving in Venice Beach and Laurel Canyon. Yes, there are problems, tensions. The Watts riots revealed deep racial wounds. But there's still optimism, still a sense that the city can evolve, can become something even greater. The economy is diverse and robust. Manufacturing plants employ hundreds of thousands. The entertainment industry is an unstoppable force. Real estate is appreciating but still accessible. A school teacher or a factory worker can buy a home, raise a family, retire comfortably. The California dream isn't just marketing, it's reality for millions of people living it every single day. Even through the 1980s and 90s, despite new challenges, earthquakes, riots, recession, Los Angeles maintains its magnetic pull. Silicon Valley is rising in the north, but Los Angeles remains the creative capital. Tech companies start opening offices here because they need access to content creators, to the storytellers and artists who can make their products feel human. The city is sprawling, yes. Traffic is worsening, yes. But neighborhoods still have character, still have community. Korean immigrants are transforming Koreatown into a vibrant cultural hub.
Los latinos y centroamericanos comunidades enriquecen la fábrica de East Los Ángeles. La gay comunidad en West Hollywood es creando safe spaces y influenciando global LGBTQ culture. For all its flaws, Los Ángeles still feels like a place where reinvención es posible, donde Samuel con talento y determinación puede moldar something from nothing. People still arrive with dreams in their pockets and fire in their hearts. But something started shifting in los 2000s, quietly at first, then with gathering momentum. The seeds of collapse were being planted while everyone was distracted por superficial glamour. Here's what really happened, and why it matters more than you think. The first poison was financialización de housing. After the 2008 financial crisis, when foreclosures devastated neighborhoods, investment firms saw oportunidad.
They began buying up single-family homes by the thousands, not to live in, not even to rent out responsibly, but as portfolio assets, as abstract numbers on balance sheets optimized for maximum return. A home that once sold for $300,000 to a young family now went for $500,000 to a hedge fund, then $700,000, then $1 million. Rents that were reasonable suddenly became crushing. A modest two-bedroom apartment that cost $1,200 a month in 2000 was suddenly $2,500, then $3,500, then $5,000. Working-class families who had lived in neighborhoods for generations found themselves priced out, forced to move to distant suburbs or leave California entirely. The city's economic diversity began to erode. You were either wealthy or struggling, with very little in between. Meanwhile, the entertainment industry, the very heart of Los Angeles' identity, was being hollowed out by forces that showed no loyalty to the city that birthed them. Production companies discovered they could film anywhere and call it Los Angeles. Georgia offered massive tax incentives. Louisiana did the same. Suddenly, movies set in Los Angeles were being shot in Atlanta. Television shows that defined LA culture were filming in Vancouver or Albuquerque. The skilled workers who built sets, operated cameras, did makeup and costumes, these weren't jobs that could be done remotely. When production left, those jobs left. Entire communities built around studio lots began to wither. Then streaming changed everything. Studios that once needed vast campuses now consolidated. Disney bought Fox and closed facilities. Warner Bros. Merged and merged again. The lots that employed thousands now employed hundreds. And here's the part that should terrify you. Artificial intelligence is now being integrated into production pipelines. Studios are experimenting with AI-generated scripts, digital actors, automated editing. The jobs that remain are being squeezed by technology that promises efficiency but delivers displacement. The homeless crisis became impossible to ignore, but the way it exploded tells you everything about systemic failure. In 2013, Los Angeles County had around 39,000 homeless individuals. By 2023, that number had surged past 75,000. Nearly twice as many human beings living in tents, in cars, under freeway overpasses, in encampments that stretched for entire city blocks. Walk through downtown Los Angeles today, and you'll see scenes that look like disaster zones from developing nations. Except this is happening in one of the wealthiest metropolitan areas on planet Earth. The city spent over $1 billion on the problem with minimal impact. Why? Because the crisis isn't really about homelessness. It's about the complete breakdown of the social safety net, the destruction of affordable housing, the gutting of mental health services, the criminalization of poverty, and the absolute refusal of the political class to address root causes. Instead, they sweep encampments from one neighborhood to another, performative cruelty that solves nothing. Residents are exhausted, business owners are desperate, and the homeless themselves are trapped in a nightmare with no exit. Crime rates began climbing. Not everywhere, not uniformly, but enough to shatter the sense of security that once defined many neighborhoods. Organized retail theft rings were hitting stores with impunity, walking out with thousands of dollars in merchandise while overwhelmed security guards watched helplessly. Smash-and-grab robberies at luxury stores became so common they stopped making headlines. Catalytic converter thefts reached epidemic proportions. Every single night, dozens of people would wake up to find their cars disabled, hundreds or thousands of dollars in damage for criminals seeking $50 worth of scrap metal. Carjackings increased. Home invasions in previously safe areas made people question whether they could stay. The police department, battered by budget cuts, staffing shortages, and a crisis of morale, struggled to respond effectively. Response times stretched from minutes to hours. Entire categories of crime were essentially deprioritized. If your car was broken into, good luck getting an officer to come take a report. The social contract between citizens and their city was fracturing, and everyone could feel it. Then came the fires. Los Angeles has always lived with fire danger. It's part of the ecosystem, but climate change supercharged the threat into something unprecedented. The Woolsey Fire in 2018 burned nearly 100,000 acres and destroyed over 1,600 structures. The air quality became so toxic that people couldn't go outside for weeks.
Schools closed, hospitals filled with respiratory cases. And this became the new normal, not once a decade, but multiple times every year. Fall arrives and everyone checks their evacuation routes, packs go bags, watches air quality apps obsessively. Homeowners insurance companies started pulling out of California entirely, deciding the risk was no longer profitable. People who had paid premiums faithfully for decades suddenly couldn't get coverage at any price. Or if they could, the costs were astronomical, adding thousands more to already crushing housing expenses. The psychological toll of living under perpetual threat, of watching your neighbors lose everything, of breathing smoke-filled air for months at a time, this grinds people down in ways that don't show up in statistics but are devastatingly real. Infrastructure began visibly failing. The roads, never great to begin with, deteriorated into obstacle courses of potholes and crumbling asphalt. The public transit system, chronically underfunded and incomplete, couldn't provide real alternatives to driving. The water system, built for a city of 2 million in 1940, was straining to serve 10 million. Rolling blackouts became common during heat waves as the electrical grid maxed out. The port, once the busiest in America, was clogged with dysfunction during the pandemic, revealing how fragile the logistics networks had become. For decades, Los Angeles had been coasting on infrastructure investments made by previous generations, patching and maintaining, but never truly upgrading. And now, all those deferred costs were coming due simultaneously. The bill is in the hundreds of billions, maybe trillions, and nobody knows where that money will come from. The pandemic was the accelerant that turned slow decline into rapid collapse. When COVID-19 hit in 2020, it exposed every vulnerability, widened every crack, destroyed whatever remained of civic cohesion. Suddenly, working from home was not just possible but mandatory for millions, and people started doing math. Why am I paying $4,500 a month for a one-bedroom apartment in Silver Lake when I can work remotely from anywhere? Why am I spending 3 hours a day in traffic when I can live in Austin or Nashville or Boise and have actual space, actual quality of life? The tech workers left first, the ones with portable high-income jobs, then creative professionals, then middle management, then anyone who could. The exodus that had been a trickle became a flood. Entire apartment buildings emptied out. Office towers in downtown sat vacant. Retail corridors that depended on foot traffic died. The tax base started evaporating at exactly the moment the city needed resources most. Services were cut. Programs were eliminated. The death spiral was underway. And here's what makes this so painful, so fundamentally tragic. None of this was inevitable. Los Angeles didn't have to collapse. Every single problem I've described had solutions. Difficult solutions, expensive solutions, politically challenging solutions, but solutions nonetheless. Other cities have built affordable housing at scale. Other regions have invested in public transit that actually works. Other governments have addressed homelessness with comprehensive approaches combining housing, healthcare, and services. Other places have adapted to climate change with serious mitigation efforts. But Los Angeles, or more accurately, the people with power in Los Angeles, chose not to. They chose short-term profits over long-term sustainability. They chose to protect property values instead of housing people. They chose to cut taxes for the wealthy while services for everyone else withered. They chose to let corporations dominate housing markets. They chose to offshore production and gut unions. They chose to criminalize poverty instead of addressing its causes. Every step of the way, at every decision point, they chose money over people, greed over community, personal gain over collective good. The human cost is staggering and often invisible to those who don't want to see it. Think about the family that's been in Boyle Heights for 4 generations, watching their neighborhood gentrify, their rent double, their community displaced. Think about the entertainment industry worker who spent 20 years building a career, suddenly competing with AI tools that can do their job for free. Think about the teacher who loves their students but can't afford to live in the district where they work, commuting 2 hours each way. Think about the small business owner who survived the pandemic only to be crushed by rent increases, supply chain chaos, and the exodus of their customer base.
Think about the elderly person on a fixed income, watching their property taxes climb, unable to afford the city they helped build. Think about the young person who grew up hearing about California dreams, only to face a reality of roommates in their 30s, student debt, climate anxiety, and a future that looks nothing like what was promised. These aren't statistics. These are millions of individual tragedies, millions of betrayed hopes, millions of people who played by the rules and got nothing but struggle. The irony is almost too bitter to process. Los Angeles, the city that symbolized possibility, that told the world anyone could make it if they just worked hard enough, has become a monument to inequality, a place where dreams go to die slowly under the weight of impossible economics. The studios that created the mythology of California cool are now empty soundstages. The beaches that represented freedom are increasingly privatized or inaccessible. The neighborhoods that pulsed with creative energy are either gentrified beyond recognition or abandoned to decline. The innovation that once defined the region has moved elsewhere, to cities that invested in education, infrastructure, and quality of life. Los Angeles is left with spectacle without substance, image without reality, the shell of greatness housing the rot of neglect. And yet, some people are still trying to pretend everything is fine. Real estate agents still tout the weather and the beaches while ignoring that housing is unaffordable for 90% of residents. Politicians still give speeches about recovery and renewal while refusing to confront powerful interests. Business leaders still promise that prosperity is just around the corner if we just give more tax breaks, more incentives, more handouts to those who already have everything. The cognitive dissonance is maddening. The city is literally burning, flooding, crumbling, and emptying out, but the official narrative remains relentlessly optimistic, a toxic positivity that refuses to acknowledge reality, because acknowledging reality would require admitting complicity, would require fundamental change. Here's what happens next, and why you should care even if you've never set foot in California. Los Angeles is the canary in the coal mine for American cities. Every problem manifesting there exists elsewhere, just less advanced, just less visible, just waiting for the right conditions to metastasize. The financialization of housing is happening nationwide. The gutting of public services is happening nationwide. The infrastructure decay is happening nationwide. The climate disasters are happening nationwide. The wealth inequality is happening nationwide. The political dysfunction is happening nationwide. Los Angeles is simply further down the path, showing us our collective future if we don't change course. When a city of this size, with this much wealth, with this much global influence, can fall apart this dramatically, it signals that something is profoundly broken in how we organize society, how we prioritize resources, how we think about community and citizenship and the social contract. The exodus from Los Angeles is redistributing not just people, but problems. Those 600,000 who left didn't stop existing. They moved to Phoenix, to Las Vegas, to Austin, to Boise, to Portland, bringing both their talents and their needs. Housing markets in destination cities spiked as demand surged. Infrastructure in those cities is now straining. The political tensions that defined California are being exported to red states that weren't prepared. Climate refugees from fire zones are moving to flood zones or drought zones, temporarily escaping one crisis while walking into another. There is no escape, only the illusion of escape, because the systemic problems that destroyed Los Angeles are systemic, are national, are in some cases global. You can run to Texas, but Texas is facing its own infrastructure collapse, its own climate disasters, its own housing crisis. You can run to Idaho, but Idaho's resources can't handle exponential population growth. The problems follow because they're built into how we've structured everything. Let's talk about what it feels like to watch a city die. There's a specific kind of grief, a mourning for something that was never perfect, but was yours, was home, was the backdrop to your memories and your identity. Longtime Angelinos talk about the city in past tense now. They remember when you could drive to the beach in 15 minutes. They remember when rent was something you could actually afford on a normal salary. They remember when neighborhoods felt safe and connected. They remember when the air was cleaner and the fires were manageable. They remember when it felt like tomorrow might be better than today. That optimism, that fundamental hope that defined the California experience has curdled into cynicism and resignation. People don't talk about their dreams anymore. They talk about exit strategies, about where they'll go when it finally becomes unbearable, about whether they can hold on just a few more years. The psychological damage of living in a failing city, watching it fail, feeling powerless to stop it, this creates a collective trauma that will echo for generations. The cultural impact is equally devastating, but harder to quantify. Los Angeles was where global culture was manufactured. Music, film, television, fashion, trends, memes, the stuff that defined how people around the world thought and felt and aspired. So much of it came from this one place. But as the city hollows out, as the artists leave, as the studios consolidate and automate, as the creative class is priced out or burned out or just out, what happens to culture itself? We're already seeing the effects. Fewer original films, more franchises and sequels. Fewer risks, more algorithms. Fewer human stories, more focus-grouped content. Fewer new voices, more gatekeeping by those who remain. The diversity that made Los Angeles culture rich and complex is being replaced by homogeneity, by safe bets, by corporate-approved visions that offend no one and inspire no one. When the city that gave us everything from Chinatown to Boys in the Hood to La La Land becomes a place where artists can't afford to live, where studios see creators as expenses to minimize, what stories get told? Who tells them? And for whom? The environmental future looks even grimmer. Climate models predict Los Angeles will face longer droughts, more intense heat waves, more catastrophic fires, more destructive storms as weather patterns destabilize. The Mediterranean climate that made the region so desirable is shifting into something harsher, less forgiving, less habitable. Water security is an existential question. The Colorado River, which supplies a huge portion of Southern California's water, is drying up as upstream states compete for diminishing resources and climate change reduces snowpack. Desalination is expensive and energy-intensive. Conservation can only go so far. At some point, the question becomes whether 10 million people can sustainably live in a semi-arid basin that never had the natural resources to support that many humans. The answer might be no. And if that's true, if Los Angeles is fundamentally unsustainable in its current form, then what we're watching isn't just a crisis, but the beginning of a long, painful process of managed decline, of contraction, of becoming a smaller, poorer, less important place. Yet there are still people who love this city desperately, who refuse to give up on it, who fight every day to preserve what's good and change what's broken. Community organizers working to build affordable housing, teachers staying in classrooms despite impossible conditions, artists creating beauty in the margins, activists demanding accountability from those in power, neighbors helping neighbors through fires and earthquakes and pandemics. This is the paradox of Los Angeles right now. Simultaneous collapse and resilience, death and stubborn life, despair and defiant hope. These people aren't naive. They see the problems clearly, but they've decided the city is worth fighting for, that the people here deserve better, that surrender is not an option. Whether their efforts can overcome the massive structural forces arrayed against them remains an open question. History suggests they're fighting a losing battle, but history is also full of unexpected reversals, of moments when organized people defeated organized money, when communities asserted their right to determine their own futures. What would it actually take to save Los Angeles? The answer is both simple and impossibly difficult. It would require treating housing as a human right rather than an investment vehicle, building hundreds of thousands of affordable units, regulating or eliminating corporate ownership of single-family homes. It would require massive public investment in infrastructure, transit, water systems, fire prevention, green energy. It would require a complete reimagining of how we address homelessness, combining permanent supportive housing with comprehensive mental health and addiction services. It would require standing up to powerful interests, entertainment corporations, real estate developers, tech giants, and demanding they contribute their fair share. It would require regional cooperation, because Los Angeles cannot solve problems created by national and global forces acting alone. It would require confronting climate change as the civilizational emergency it is, preparing for a hotter, drier, more dangerous future while working to prevent the worst outcomes. Most of all, it would require political courage, the willingness to make unpopular decisions, to sacrifice short-term gains for long-term survival, to tell voters the truth about how bad things are and how hard the solutions will be. The chances of all that happening? Honestly, not great. The political system is too corrupted by money. The public is too divided and exhausted. The problems are too big and too interconnected. The time to act was 20 years ago, and that moment was squandered. What we're left with now is damage control, trying to manage collapse rather than prevent it, trying to make the landing softer even if we can't stop the fall. Maybe Los Angeles will surprise us. Maybe the next generation of leaders will be different. Maybe the crisis will get bad enough that radical change becomes possible. Maybe. But maybe is not a strategy, and hope is not a plan. So why does this matter to you wherever you are? Because Los Angeles is showing you your future if current trajectories continue. It's showing you what happens when inequality reaches breaking points. It's showing you what happens when we treat housing as speculation rather than shelter. It's showing you what happens when we underfund public goods and services until they collapse. It's showing you what happens when we ignore climate change until disaster becomes routine. It's showing you what happens when we let corporations write policy and politicians serve donors instead of constituents. It's showing you what happens when we lose our sense of collective responsibility, when it becomes every person for themselves, when community dissolves into competition. Los Angeles is not an exception. It's a preview. The city of angels is falling, and the silence around its collapse is deafening. We should be treating this as a national crisis, as a wake-up call, as urgent motivation to change course before more cities follow the same path. Instead, we watch from a distance, we shake our heads at California's problems, we tell ourselves it could never happen here. We change the channel. But it is happening here, wherever here is for you, just slower, just quieter, just easier to ignore. Until suddenly it isn't. Until suddenly your rent has doubled and your kids can't afford to stay. Until suddenly the smoke is in your air and the water is running out. Until suddenly your city, your home, the place you thought would always be there, is collapsing too. Los Angeles is dying, and nobody wants to talk about it. Because talking about it means confronting uncomfortable truths about who we are and what we've become. It means admitting that the system is broken, that the American dream is a lie for most people, that our children will inherit a diminished world. It means acknowledging that we've failed, collectively, spectacularly, and that fixing the mess will require sacrifices we've shown no willingness to make. So instead, we stay silent, we look away, we pretend everything is fine. And the city keeps dying, one family at a time, one neighborhood at a time, one dream at a time, until there's nothing left but memories of what once was and could have been.